Welcome back to the Five Insider. Of course, we have got David Ornstein in the building today, just 12 hours or so after the final whistle blew on the transfer window. We've got him a coffee. He's got a few hours sleep. David, what a window first and foremost. But I want to start with a news story that you broke that shocked everyone. Joao Cancelo leaving Manchester City. What happened? When did you first hear about it? And yeah, give us your thoughts on it.
It shocked everyone, including me.
I bet.
So I don't profess,
when that call came through.
I don't profess to have prior knowledge of this. You can say now with hindsight that it didn't entirely surprise you, given with Man City and Pep Guardiola, if not all is well behind the scenes with some players, they tend to look to move them on. And there were soundings that a player of Joao Cancelo's level, quality, experience, age, wanted to be playing regularly. And I'd heard bits and bobs that gave rise to the suspicion that he may move at some point, but I did not see this coming. And when, in a conversation, I was told to look into it, and then further calls suggested that it might be accurate. And when I worked with my colleague Paul Balus of The Athletic, to try and make absolutely certain of the story, I was sort of stunned that it was happening. And what seems to have taken place is that over the weekend, following the Arsenal FA Cup tie, a deal was structured. Negotiations took place with Bayern Munich, who were evidently very keen on bringing him in. And one of the calls I made straight after I started to get wind of this was, Munich, why? And I was told they've actually been fond of him for a long time. This is not a recent admiration. And they've got some problems in their defence with form and fitness that meant it was quite a logical move, but just behind the scenes and under the surface, which shows not everything comes out in this day and age when it's bubbling. There were some reports in the Daily Mail. Mike Keegan, I think, suggested a possible bust-up in training ahead of that Arsenal match. And so that's information that I'm not aware of, but Mike's a really good journalist on the Manchester patch, and he's broken a lot of stories about Manchester City. It would make some sense. And so when we got our ducks in a row, we were able to press the button, pull the trigger, and reveal that he was on his way to Bayern Munich, the deal being a loan until the end of the season with an option to buy for 70 million euros. He underwent his medical and they got the contract signed. It was actually quite smooth in the end. Manchester City do have the capacity to surprise you because they go about their business pretty quietly. Deals like Erling Haaland are more high profile because there's more people involved. And so, that will always start to leak out into the public domain. But Manuel Akanji, for example, nobody was on top of that one. Fortunately, it was a story I broke as well. But they're very clinical and organised and structured in who they want to go for, how quickly they want to move, whether it's ins or outs, and they get it done. And so, that was one that took a lot of us by surprise, especially because Manchester City had let Zinchenko go, so they were a bit depleted at left back. Kyle Walker's getting on in his career. I say that with total respect to a top player and person. Rico Lewis is coming through, and that may have been a key factor in this. Nathan Ake started to excel on the other side. Laporte can play there as well. But back to that point of squad harmony, if Manchester City feel that someone should go and they've got the right opportunity, then they'll do it. And they did.
From your perspective, when you first hear that bit of news that, I think that Joao Cancelo could go on loan to Bayern, what are you thinking? Well, what's going through your head as a journalist in that moment?
Firstly, did I hear that correct? Secondly, have you got your information accurate? Have you got the wrong player? Have you got the wrong team? And then you realise that most things in this industry don't surprise you anymore, and you've actually seen stranger things happen. And so you go onto autopilot and make your normal checks. It's a pretty formulaic process, and you kind of become desensitized to how crazy this industry and environment are. And you follow the right procedure and get to where you need to go and get it out there and let the rest of the world go into meltdown. And you actually then move on to your next story. And that's one of the keys, because we were approaching deadline day let's see who else is doing stuff that may be even more far-fetched. But I don't think the window opened, especially on the men's side, with anything more surprising than that. Although on the women's side, it was around the same time that I broke news, maybe a day later, of Arsenal making a world record bid for Alessia Russo at Manchester United, which they managed to resist in the end and keep her at the club, and they'll go on and try and have a successful season. But it just shows that you never know what's around the corner, and that's one of the things that makes the transfer market so exciting.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned there, obviously, calls coming in late. We should start with the biggest bit of business of the window, Enzo Fernandez, of course, British record transfer. Yep. I mean, imagine you were still getting calls very late into the window there because obviously it was only 25 minutes or so and they got the deal sheet in, wasn't it?
Yeah, that's right. And I might just wind this back because when Enzo Fernandez came off the pitch at the World Cup final, we hear that Todd Bowley said to his Chelsea recruitment staff, "Get me that man."
Really? Is that goes as far back as that?
Well, of course, they would have even been watching him during the tournament, but I think that was the moment where they were clear on their determination to get him in. And I don't mind exposing myself to a little secret here that doesn't reflect too well on me, that a contact messaged me a voice note on Boxing Day, 26th of December, when you should be indulging in the leftovers from your Christmas dinner.
You weren't on the phone.
No, absolutely. And he said that Chelsea are really hot on Enzo Fernandez. They would like to do it in the January window for below the release clause if they can. But if not, then they'll go as far as the release clause. Benfica are desperate to keep hold of him.
Yeah.
And therefore, this is not going to be easy and it's not going to be quick, but Chelsea are determined to get it done. But like with all of these things, you need to corroborate your information. You need to get other independent sources. And I didn't manage to do that at the time. And within days of Christmas, and you might see this if you check back on reports, Chelsea's interest started to materialise. Liverpool, who were initially rumoured to be going for him, were pushed to one side. And no sooner had that happened that offers were being talked about. Chelsea did have their approach knocked back because they didn't want to go to the release clause. They wanted to get him for lower. Benfica said he's not for sale for anything lower than the release clause. Roger Schmidt, their manager, was quite vociferous in the way he reacted to Chelsea.
They seemed a bit annoyed. They seemed a little bit annoyed.
And he felt that Chelsea had unsettled the player to the point where he went back to Argentina, then came back to Benfica, and he was in and out of the picture. But those were the foundations laid, even though it didn't happen there and then. And contrary to what many of us thought, when Chelsea were then going off and bidding for Moises Caicedo and looking at others, which they genuinely were, the conversation was still going on in the background, largely led by Jorge Mendes, because he's an intermediary who was not representing Enzo Fernandez. He was a broker in this situation. And he, of all people, is going to keep that conversation rumbling on. And then late last week, they started to heat it up. It developed. It started to step forward. It wasn't that talks reopened, because they never closed, but they started to advance. And it was at that point that confidence began to grow. But there was still big questions, because the resistance was still there from Benfica. The background and a little bit of animosity there too. Enzo Fernandez's contract had been agreed already, so that wasn't the issue. He wanted to come. He did have other interests, but he picked Chelsea. And then it was all down to deadline day and whether they could do it, and it was a race against time. It was sort of looking on, then off, optimism, then pessimism, and that pendulum kept swinging back, forward, left and right. Of course, Benfica were playing as well, and it's my understanding that once Benfica had given permission for a medical to take place just in case this deal had happened, that optimism was really starting to be heightened. And despite them scrambling to keep him and begging him, as it was described to me, to stay, that around 9:30 p.m. during the match that they won, they finally indicated that their decision would be to go ahead with this. And from that moment on, it was a race against time to sort paperwork, deal sheets, complete that medical, get all the T's crossed and I's dotted to ensure that it was actually finished in time. And at the time of recording, I think it was, although I don't think it's been announced.
I think so.
And Chelsea have their man.
Yeah, and you as a journalist, when that sort of thing is happening and it is going back and forth, on and off, How do you kind of sort through what is going on and what isn't going on? Because you must have so many different opinions coming into your phone at that time.
Yeah, definitely. And your job as a journalist is to explore and investigate all of the information that's coming into you and scrutinize it properly. So checking it with independent sources to see if you can corroborate it and follow the established and crucial journalistic process. And sometimes it means you can get information out there and that it is authoritative enough and proven to be accurate and it's a development in the story. At other times it isn't. Sometimes you're the first and you're pleased to have the little scoop or exclusive, and at other times others come out with bits. There are moments where you're nervous because you're hearing one thing and somebody else reports another thing. You then look at how authoritative that outlet's track record is and that person's reputation, and sometimes you might not be privy to the right thing or have moved quick enough, or it might be worth standing back because other things are developing and you're constantly analysing and debating and evaluating.
It must be a bit of a buzz though when you are that guy who breaks a big story or a big moment in a transfer like Enzo.
Yeah, of course it's pleasing to get like an exclusive or a scoop, and every journalist will say the same. But actually, it's far more important to be accurate than to be quick. And if you manage to do both, then bingo. But it's an industry of ever more focus on transfers. The windows are becoming bigger business for the clubs,
this
for the media.
This window in particular, my goodness.
And it's becoming like a sport in itself. And therefore, there are ever more journalists trying to get the information and do good work. Some of it is fantastic, some of it is not so good. Across the sphere, it's becoming more competitive. As people like me get older and have other commitments in your journalistic and home life as well, you've got more publications and outlets. There's been a real fragmentation of this part of the reporting industry. And you've got whippersnappers coming up with more enthusiasm, energy and time than me. And you just try and stay towards the top end of the industry if you can. And it's a real privilege sort of bestowed on your shoulders. And never forget that. And always conduct yourself in the right manner, with the right values and integrity, and deal with your contacts in the best possible way. You win some, you lose some in these situations, and you've got to stay calm about it. Hopefully you win more than you lose, but you've got huge respect for everybody else out there doing great work. And ultimately, it's only football, it's only transfers, and it's something that we can reflect on with a laugh and look forward to the next one.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we mentioned the biggest window possibly I've ever seen in January. Definitely the best in my opinion. I don't know about you, but I mean, Chelsea played a huge role. We've spoken about Enzo, but over 300 million, I think, worth of acquisition, 600 million across 2 windows under Todd Burley and Clear Lake. It feels like a massive spend given I think it dwarfs a lot of the European top 5 leagues combined, doesn't it? It's a lot of money, and people will be saying, how have they been able to do this in 2 windows? How are they complying with FFP?
Yeah, well, that's the big question, and I saw that on my notifications, and pretty much everyone is asking it. They did outspend every other club in Europe's top 5 leagues combined. And I'm sure that will show no sign of abating going forward, which is why the question will continue to be pertinent. They do have the money, clearly, with the investment that has come into Chelsea with this takeover. But it doesn't mean they can spend all that they want. Maybe they would like to do a lot more because of the financial fair play rules. And basically, it's actually quite clear that they are committing significant transfer fees over the course of unprecedentedly long contracts. 7.5 years, 8.5 years. And the way currently accounting works within football is that you can spread the cost of the transfer fee over the course of the contract.
Right.
It's called amortization. So if you divide the transfer fee by the number of years or the number of payments they agree within their negotiation, then it is actually manageable because it will only go on their financial accounts as the set amount for that particular year. Whereas when you sell a player, that all goes into the books in one go.
Okay.
And so that's how the balances work out. And if Chelsea, for example, had sold a player like Conor Gallagher for £40 million, especially because he is homegrown, it would have accounted as £40 million
in one
profit in one go immediately. And so that's how they are trying to make things work. Also, the salaries that Chelsea are handing to these newest signings are relatively low by comparison to the contracts handed out by the previous Chelsea regime. They think they are more in line with other Premier League clubs. And if that proves to be the case, then you need to not only look at the transfer fee or the salary, but the whole package. Because Mykhailo Mudryk signing for an initial £62 million and a £97,000 a week salary may seem astronomical, but over the course of 8.5 years, if you compare that to somebody who joins as a free agent and commands £250,000, £300,000 a week and a signing on bonus, then at the end of that 8.5 years, the second guy may actually cost as much, if not more, than Mudryk. And therefore, these things do work out in theory. The big complication is that under UEFA rules, you're not meant to go past, I think, 5 or 5.5 year contracts. That's a guideline that can be interpreted by the national associations how they wish. But there are reports that they are going to make that a formal requirement and that all leagues must follow it. If that's the case, then Chelsea's model will need to be amended going forward, but they won't be punished retrospectively. So I'm sure there will be a lot of investigation into this. But as far as I can see, and certainly what Chelsea believe, there is method to the perceived madness.
I mean, whilst we're on the topic of Chelsea, I want to talk about a couple of exits as well. One that happened and one that didn't happen. I think we should probably start with the one that didn't happen, Hakim Ziyech, who looks like he's stranded in Paris. Seems an awful situation for him. Paperwork didn't go through in the end?
Yeah, that's the message that seems to be coming through, because shortly before the deadline, I broke the news that they had reached an agreement on a loan with no option to buy that would include a loan fee to Chelsea. However, it hadn't been signed, and therein lies the problem, because it seems that when the documents were sent over by Chelsea, they were incomplete or incorrect, and therefore they missed the deadline. Now, there have been some suggestions that Chelsea might not have wanted this to go through ultimately.
Really?
He's actually been playing quite a lot for them, and so if they had, they would have made sure the documents were fine. I don't know. I haven't done enough work on this to find out exactly if it was that or whether it was just chaos.
Clerical error,
Oh, a clerical error, because Chelsea were obviously dealing with the Enzo Fernandez situation as a priority. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, that the proposed move for Amari Hutchinson to West Brom collapsed too. On loan.
Didn't see that one.
And also Xavier Simons, the young player who was meant to be going to Hull City, which would indicate that it wasn't just the Ziyech deal. And that means that there is a bit of a problem potentially for Chelsea, and a player who had his heart set and was ready to join PSG coming back into the fray, unless they can restructure something. There were some reports that there was an appeal going in. I'm not sure if that would be successful, or if he was transferred to a league that has a transfer window that's still open, Ziyech, because then lies the problem of, if he comes back, how are Chelsea going to fit all of their players into this squad, and are they going to be happy? You've got the likes of Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang, who hasn't been playing. There was speculation over whether he would have moved, but his market was very restricted because he's already played for 2 clubs this year. Will he be leaving at the end of the season, and therefore will he be much involved to a greater extent than he has been so far this season? How are they going to balance it out with homegrown players, with new signings? You can only make 3 changes to your Champions League squad. You can make more to your Premier League squad.
That's a tough decision for Potter to make then, isn't it? Because he's got fantastic options that will come in the January window.
Yeah. I mean, Graham Potter's going to have to manage the chemistry of the dressing room, but also the numbers, and win football matches at the same time and try and qualify for the Champions League.
And he lost Jorginho. I mean, that move felt to me like it came out of nowhere a little bit. Or was that something that was brewing under the surface for Arsenal? Because we've seen them do that with a player like Trossard more recently.
True. I think it was more reaction to missing out on Moises Caicedo. And although it's not a like-for-like replacement, it was conceivable that Jorginho would move because he's out of contract in the summer. And there were no talks, to our knowledge, about a new deal. He's a player that Arsenal have liked for a long time. They tried to sign him previously. Marina Granovskaya at the time at Chelsea put a block on that. He was an important part of Chelsea's setup. Vastly experienced Italy international. He's won the Euros and many competitions at club level. And so I think it was a deal that suited all parties. If we talk about Chelsea trying to recoup money when we're looking at the financial balances, well, they managed to get around £12 million in for a player with
6 months left. It's not bad.
Only around 4 months of football.
Yeah.
And so his book value would have been minimal, and they've made a profit on him. So that will be one that Chelsea will be quite pleased about. Arsenal will be happy to have got him in the building. As I understand it, a lot of the players and staff at Arsenal were very happy to acquire a player of such tactical intelligence and understanding for Mikel Arteta's system, technical quality and experience as they look to push on for the Premier League title in the second half of the season. And for him, he stays in London, doesn't need much time to acclimatise or adapt. He gets a good move where he might not have been playing so much at Chelsea. And so it feels like a bit of a win-win, that one.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, another move that kind of came out of nowhere yesterday, of course, Marcel Sabitzer to Manchester United. It seems like that was off the back of Christian Eriksen's injury. When did you first hear about Manchester United potentially entering the market? Because it was only yesterday that Erik ten Hag was saying it's very difficult to do business on deadline day, can't see it. And then suddenly 2 hours later, Sabitzer's on a plane from Munich.
Yeah, so as soon as the Eriksen injury news came out, it was made very clear to me that they were going to try and get a signing in. Erik ten Hag wanted an extra number previously. So it was a case of keep your eye on Manchester United on this deadline day, just in case, even though it was unlikely. But the Eriksen situation forced their hand. And then reports surfaced very quickly, before I could even react, from Germany in particular. I think it was Florian Plettenberg who was on top of this, that Sabitzer was the one they were going to go for. And you make your checks and inquiries, and it seems, yep, that's the case. But it was going to be very challenging financially for a short-term loan deal, where there will be a loan fee involved, I presume, and also a pretty high salary for somebody that's at Bayern Munich. And Manchester United's finances are tight. They managed to afford Wout Weghorst, the low-cost loan deal from Burnley via Besiktas. No permanent transfers on the agenda while there's this uncertainty about the ownership and if they're going to be selling or taking new investment. And they seem to be done in their window. So that would have prompted a lot of conversations between those who run Manchester United on the ground, like John Murtough and Richard Arnold, and the Glazer family, who are still in charge, even though this process to potentially sell them is being led by the Rain Group. And from what I hear, the approval for this transfer was granted by the board. That let United finalise negotiations with the player, get him to Munich airport, fly him over. They received medical records from Bayern Munich, who have a very advanced structure themselves, and they were reliable. They still had a bit of time to do some medical checks if needed, but I don't think they really did. And the signing was done, deal sheet submitted in advance of the 11 p.m. deadline. Yeah,
I mean, that one happened very, very quickly. And one of the more prolonged ones that seemed to be on, then it was off. Pedro Porro finally got done yesterday. And I know you were saying that this is a move that could collapse here. Then it came back on. That, as a journalist yourself, that must have been a hard situation because you obviously had one person telling you one thing, one person telling you another, maybe? Or
No, it was very clear, actually. This was an on-off transfer throughout the negotiation. One of the stories of the window, no doubt, because Tottenham were clear that they wanted him. There was a release clause. But with many of these release clauses, the same with Enzo Fernandez, the devil is in the detail. Because it's not just a case of paying it in installments or in one go, but there are timings involved. There are percentage of fees that need to be paid in certain ways and by certain points. And there's an intricacy and a complexity to this that me and many of us can't even get our heads around. And that was the case with Porro and another club that ideally wanted to keep hold of him, with different people wanting different things within the hierarchy at Sporting Lisbon, whether it be the president, the coach, the sporting director, lawyers, agents, player involved. And so that one had been pretty tumultuous up until the point of the weekend when it was made clear to him that if he played in the Portuguese Cup final, League Cup final, that they actually lost to Porto 2-0, then he would be allowed to leave afterwards. And reports surfaced that a verbal agreement had been reached. To my knowledge, that was Sporting Lisbon expressing what they would be willing to do, which allowed the agents involved to then relay this to Tottenham and see if Tottenham, Daniel Levy, wanted to proceed. but they wouldn't do that until it was put into writing.
Okay.
And it didn't actually get put into writing for the agents to do that. So there was hope, there was movement, but it definitely wasn't done. And then once this deal was presented to Tottenham, my knowledge on it is that the goalpost had been shifted, not for the first time.
Oh, really?
And that Sporting Lisbon had reneged on some of the terms of the verbal agreement, and also that the president had reneged on his pledge towards Pedro Porro, which left the player distraught. And so at the time of reporting, this deal was off.
In jeopardy, yeah.
It had collapsed
Yeah.
from Sunday night into Monday. Like a light switch, it's either on or it's off. It's not kind of in between. However, that doesn't mean that that light switch can not be turned on.
Yeah.
And so the negotiations gathered pace, with some people already in Portugal, others flying over. And throughout the course of Monday, it was revived to the point at which an agreement was finally reached in the evening on a deal worth 45 million euros, which then needed to be put into paperwork and documentation. And how it ended was an initial loan, 5 million fee, with an obligation to buy for 40 million euros. So a 45 million euros package, a 5.5-year contract, and Tottenham have their man. And finally, the player who was distraught is now elated. Yeah,
I mean, do you think that's the sort of move that could convince Antonio Conte to sign a new contract? Because it's a big transfer for him. It's a player who seems quite specialised to his system as a wing-back, very attacking under Ruben Amorim. I feel like that's the sort of player that Conte has been demanding from his board.
First of all, we need to wish him the best.
Yeah,
He's
of course.
Off unwell at the moment, so hopefully for him and for Tottenham and for football, he comes back in great shape. Secondly, they have backed him heavily in the transfer market in a way that you might say Tottenham haven't done historically with their managers. And they might not have been the first choice recruits in all positions, but they were recruits all the same, and they didn't come for cheap. They've now gone to great lengths to bring in Pedro Porro, who's a really top player, 23-year-old Spain international, who I can't wait to see in the Premier League, and Tottenham have already played against him. But whether it is going to convince him to sign a new contract is a completely different matter, because I think that will largely be dictated by how he's feeling on the project, the trajectory, the chances of success, how long he thinks it will take to achieve that. They may get success this season. Let's see how
the
coming weeks.
And
let's see how the coming weeks pan out, and that will be something that Harry Kane is watching very closely as well. Tottenham do have the option to extend Antonio Conte, but I think he will need to be on board with that before Tottenham decide to do so. I've always consistently reported that although there may have been talks in November and December, conversations I'm sure have continued throughout, he was never going to make a decision until much closer to the end of the expiry of that contract, when he's got a clearer picture of how the land lies. That might not be music to the ears of Daniel Levy, who, with his Tottenham hierarchy, will want clarity. But the fact that he is being given a player like Pedro Porro can't do any harm to his chances of building the squad that he wants.
Yeah, I mean, just before we wrap up, I want to talk about another project, Everton. We should drop down to the bottom end of the table. The only club that didn't bring a player in this January window. Let Anthony Gordon go for £45 million. Sean Dyche arrived very late. They had Danjuma, then they lost Danjuma. Everton fans at home, I'm sure, watching this, absolutely furious with how the window's panned out. And Sean Dyche, has got no recruits through the door. It's difficult.
Really dark days at Everton, I'm afraid to say. They, of course, lost time because they were focused on the managerial situation. Yeah. It doesn't mean that you can't get on with recruitment activity, but it's not easy because both the recruits will want to know who they're playing for, which was one of the issues in the Danjuma situation, in that he asked for assurances that he would be playing for Frank Lampard and not David Moyes, for example, who was rumoured to be coming into Everton. And I think there was some kind of friction around reports that West Ham were looking at him in the summer, and some information that came out about his character that he was not happy with, that meant that he perhaps would not have wanted to play under that manager if it came to fruition. And those reassurances were not received that Frank Lampard was going to be the manager. And so it gave him pause for thought. And meanwhile, other clubs like Crystal Palace, for example, were coming in and pushing, but he stuck with Everton.
And then Tottenham came.
Then Tottenham came and everything changed. And there's much more to that story too. But to your wider point, what we don't know is how much of the Anthony Gordon transfer fee, which is 40 million in one payment, and then
money.
5 million in add-ons, which would suggest you've got resources to play with. How much of that was available to Kevin Thelwell as the director of football at Everton to recruit, and how much of it needed to go elsewhere to running costs, to any stadium requirements. I don't know the ins and outs of it, but it would appear that, and I've been told that not all of it was available for recruitment. Furthermore, the position that Everton are in and the mess that is being displayed to the outside world would have definitely dissuaded a lot of players from joining. No doubt about that. And when you look at players like Ndai at Sheffield United, who was one player they were interested in, and they're on the up, and Everton seem to be on the downward spiral at the moment, how attractive a proposition is it? So they did have irons in fires. Sulemana from Rennes, who ended up going to Southampton, they put a financial permanent transfer offer in to Rennes, which they weren't really doing before they had the Anthony Gordon funds. They were looking at loans and low-cost transfers. He picked Southampton. They inquired or explored the possibility of signing Michy Batshuayi from Fenerbahce, but he decided that he was happy there. And
that's crazy, isn't it, that Michy Batshuayi, given that he has experienced life across multiple teams in the Premier League, didn't feel that project was stable enough for him.
And what was really sharp, I'm sure, for Everton is that he wanted to play for a club who had a stable project.
That's unbelievable, isn't it?
And he sees that at Fenerbahce under Jorge Jesus, and clearly he didn't see that at Everton. So it's really difficult, and the fans are not happy at all. They've vented their frustration towards the owner, Farhad Moshiri, Bill Kenwright as chairman, Denise Barrett-Baxendale as chief executive, and a number of others as well. But they've also got some good people there, and I think there is a lot more to this story than meets the eye. No doubt it will come out in the weeks and months ahead, but the point remains that they've got a Premier League campaign to try and scramble their way through. And I think in that sense that Sean Dyche is a good appointment to galvanise the talent that he has at his disposal, which is pretty significant when you look across that Everton squad. And if they can keep players like Dominic Calvert-Lewin fit and continue to harness the potential of someone like Onana, then they've got it within them to claw their way out of trouble. But it doesn't mean that more problems are not on the horizon in terms of the ownership situation, the finances. And don't forget that in 2024, they're meant to be moving into a state-of-the-art new stadium. And it's looking precarious. And I suspect there will be a lot more change going on there in the times ahead. And it's going to keep us talking.
I mean, that ownership situation you mentioned there, Farhad Moshiri, who I think is denied, hasn't he, that the club is up for sale, but fans seem to think it is. I was watching Jamie Carragher earlier on Sky Sports News saying that he thinks, given the lack of investment, that it could be up for sale. Do you think that is going to be a serious issue going into later 2023, the sale of Everton?
There is this feeling within the industry that they, like many clubs, have always been for sale. What's not for sale in life? Not much. Everything has a price. But until that price is met, those in control of clubs like Everton, in this case, are going to say that it's not for sale. There have also been suggestions that he's looking more for stadium financing partners. So if something that was too good to refuse came in, I'm sure that Farhad Moshiri would heavily consider it. But at this moment in time, we don't have any evidence to suggest it is. And so his ownership continues, and he has to give off the right noises because he's the man in charge of running the club. But Everton fans will be dearly hoping that changes. And I think in situations like this, it would be foolish of us to rule it out that an Everton takeover could happen and Farhad Moshiri could sell. But at this point in time, I'm not aware of that happening.
David, thank you so much for your time today. If you haven't already, go and follow David on the socials. That's all we've got time for today. If you enjoyed the video, hit the like button, hit subscribe. Thanks very much for watching, everybody. We'll see you later.